Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real-time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Well, welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest today. He is a seasoned entrepreneur with over 3 decades of experience launching and expanding startup ventures with the technology sector. He's actively shaping the ethical fundraising practices across the UK with a revolutionary payment solutions. Please welcome the co-founder and CEO of Wonderful, Kieron James. Welcome, Kieron.
Hi, Greg. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you. There's a pun there. My first pun for the day. Here, we love talking about endurance and the endurance mindset. Please tell me how your endurance mindset has impacted your life unexpectedly.
Unexpectedly interesting. I think one of the things, well, a couple of things from a purely kind of leisure aspect rather than business, just to kick off. I remember seeing that question and thinking about a conversation I had with a physiotherapist a few years ago. So I was in there for running, a couple of running injuries from running long distances for a long time. And I'd started I'd taken up yoga quite recently to try and combat that. And I felt like I was making good progress with the yoga. And one of the things she said to me, which really resonated, particularly now, kind of 10, 12 years on from that, is yoga's fantastic, but do realize it's a life sentence. Once you start, you can't stop. Otherwise, you're really going to feel the pain. So I guess in terms of endurance, a couple of things around the yoga and that side that resonated with me, that being one. And the other was, I remember speaking to my first yoga teacher, and the kind of practice I do is called Ashtanga, and it's broken down into 6 series. And he said, by the time you've mastered series 1, you're probably 12 years from now. And again, that gave me a sense of the endurance of ever getting to series, which I won't do. So yeah, those are a couple of things. From a business point of view, I think it's just that whole sense of things always taking longer than you anticipate. So there's just an inevitability about that. But kind of 30 years into it now, I fully anticipate that with everything.
You're spot on. For the audience members who don't know Ashtanga yoga, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's probably one of the most physical types of yoga in the sense that there's a lot of flow in that sequence. So by flow, you're doing a lot of jumping back, jumping forward. So there's basically, with each movement, there's supposed to be an inhale or an exhale. So it's probably about 90 minutes from start to end, the practice. And literally for that whole 90 minutes, as you go into one movement and then into the next, you're either inhaling or exhaling. So it's quite concentrated in terms of, you need to really focus a lot on what you're doing throughout. But it's also in that sense, once you've learned the sequence, it's also quite meditative, because if you get that flow going with the breath, it does feel really, really great.
Any unexpected benefit from that practice from 12 years ago when you started to today?
Yeah, I think so. Without a doubt, in terms of kind of physicality and so on, it's absolutely helped with the running. Every time I take a break from that mat, which I try and do as frequently as possible, but now and again, you just got to, work gets in the way, life gets in the way, you're traveling. I really, really notice it with the running. So I think it's great for balancing out, the stresses that running places on your body. So no, I thoroughly enjoy it, and it's a real kind of yin and yang from going out and doing a 10K or a half marathon or whatever.
That's brilliant. You left me a little breadcrumb talking about business and how things seem to take longer than expected, and that's something you've learned over your experience. Can you go a little bit deeper? Any specific examples that sort of pop up? Any business stories or ventures that come to mind when you say that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's always surprising, but no longer isn't, it's always surprising to new people that start this, is what the trigger is from suddenly having, no customers to actually being fairly inundated with demand. And you can often sit there with the business that you've started and think, well, I haven't really changed very much. I'm doing the same thing. What has suddenly happened to make that demand materialize? So there's always a part of me that says, whenever I'm launching anything, remember to be patient, because sometimes it can take a couple of years for that to happen. Obviously, that can not always be easy to fund and support. But if you can retain that patience, there does seem to be a lag between you starting the marketing and then seeing some kind of response. And as I say, for me, over many years and many businesses, that's always been a really odd thing. You'll stand back and think, well, I've not really changed the AdWords spend. I've not really changed the SEO. It's all much the same. And suddenly we've started to get some demand, whether that's organic word of mouth or who knows. But that's quite a tricky one. And I think the other thing is, we're in the process at the moment of raising money for the particular business that I'm in. Always went into that knowing it was going to be quite a lengthy process. I think we hit the market in terms of investment in the fintech sector at exactly the wrong time, which we kind of fully knew that was going to happen just because we had to go through some other steps with this particular business in terms of regulation. That seemed to be dragging its heels, and all the time we're watching the market thinking, really hope we get this sorted soon. But no, sure enough, we got the regulation and the authorization just at the time that the market kind of really changed for investment in the fintech sector. So again, we've had to sit back and sort of sit that out and think, how do we scale things, make sure we can manage through this period until that situation changes a little. So yeah, there are things that you don't plan for, things that you do. And even when you do, oftentimes it just feels like it takes longer. Mentioning that regulation piece, for example, in this, we're a payments business, so we have to be authorized by the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK. We went into that process kind of anticipating it will be about 3 months. It ended up being 11. So again, just another one of those things. And everyone who's been through that process says, yeah, that sounds about right. Probably a year from start to finish. And you go, okay, would have been nice to know earlier.
So relating that back to running and endurance, make that connection for it. How does that also translate back into your running career, your endurance training?
For me, it's a great analogy for business all of the time. I commented to the guys the other day in the team because we were having a call, and I was saying, what you've got to think about with our revolutionary technology here is that we're trying to unseat 60 years of habit. So credit cards and debit cards probably less so, but credit cards were introduced into the UK pretty much the same time that I was. So, it's a long time ago. So on that basis, it often feels like, I think I came back from a run with this in mind, and I've been going a fairly steep hill in southern Spain. It was hot, it was humid, it was a long old climb. And I got back to the office and I said, it's not just a simple analogy. It really is what we're trying to do here. It's going to be an uphill struggle to convince users to adopt this new technology. But you've got to recognize, and it's a route that I follow very frequently, I've got so many photos from the top of that hill because the reward when you get there is genuinely spectacular. So it's a simple, very straightforward analogy, but it's so true. I think so many times in preparing for that long distance race, whether it's a marathon or a half marathon or whatever, all of that work that you're putting in will yield benefits in the end. But it's oftentimes on a rainy, windy Sunday when you're out for your long run, battling the elements, and the race is still, 12, 14 weeks away. That can feel like a real challenge. So yeah, parallels, I think, for that and business for me are really clear.
I find that the work that we do when no one's watching is the work that really matters. Kieron, let's talk a little bit more about the project, your business you're working on now. Tell us a little bit more about that and educate our audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to do so. I'll take a back step actually, just before I get into what we're doing now, because the journey to what we're doing now is kind of quite interesting. And also talking about endurance, it's one of those things that sometimes it's those serendipitous moments that create that, that transition into something new rather than actually setting out thinking, oh, I'm going to spend the next 3 years doing this. So let me wind back the clock to 2016. I was actually running a telecoms business at the time. And my youngest child, my son, decided he was going to do a parachute jump for charity. And he did that. And we all went down to watch him jump out of an aeroplane on a Sunday morning. And you'd think that would have been the most exciting and memorable thing to happen that day. But actually it wasn't. It was late in the evening when we all sat down to dinner, and he came stomping down the stairs, and he was really, really cross. You could see it. And we said, what's the matter? And he said, I've raised a ton of money from my friends who can ill afford it. And I've just found out that a large chunk of that is actually not going to go to the charity that I'm supporting at all. It's going to be deducted by the fundraising platform. There are further deductions for card processing fees. There are deductions from a tax relief scheme for charities. And he was just kind of, it was pretty palpable, that sense of frustration. So there and then we said, well, yes, we've got some really great developers in the telecoms business. We've got some spare capacity on the network. Why don't we set about and see whether we can build a fundraising platform that makes sure every penny goes to charity with no deductions whatsoever? So, kind of long story short, but we set that in motion. We said we'd fund the first £1 million through the platform in terms of all the associated costs with that, which was actually not that huge, probably about a £30,000-40,000 commitment for the business, and then find a corporate sponsor. Again, just kind of cutting through all of that, the problem that we had was that platform then grew in popularity quite rapidly. But as it grew, the costs associated with delivering those free donations to the charities was all around the cost of processing card payments. So everyone was donating using a debit and credit card. There was just a linear relationship between those donations and the amount effectively we were paying for payment processing. So that got picked up by a bank in the UK who became our corporate sponsor. But it still created this tension between, we've got this really low ceiling on our impact and reach. We can't remove it because of the cost of card processing. And yet there are thousands and thousands more charities, donors and fundraisers that we'd love to support. So COVID came along and we paused to take stock briefly. And just at the start of COVID, I ended up making a donation to somebody, nothing to do with our platform, completely separate from that. But it used something called open banking. And essentially, I tapped a link in LinkedIn for somebody who was having the head shaved during lockdown for a charity. And within a couple of seconds, I'd transferred, I don't know, £30-40 from my account into the charity's account. It was seamless. It was really, really straightforward. There was no data entry whatsoever. It was literally tap this link, authorize that payment in my mobile banking app, and it was done. And there was that penny drop moment when you just think, well, that was so great. I'm going to get in touch with the company and see whether we can use that technology to relaunch the platform post-COVID. It was incredibly cheap compared to the cost of card processing. So again, we sort of very swiftly after that thought, I wonder whether there's an opportunity for us to go into that kind of space and look at payment processing as an alternative to the telecoms business. And that's essentially how we ended up doing this. It was that if it's costing charities this much money to get paid to receive donations, then that problem exists everywhere, in the commercial world as well. So it's been a real win-win for us because we've now removed that ceiling on impact and reach. We can process as many donations as we like with no real concerns about the cost of those, A, because we're doing it ourselves, and B, because of the way open banking works. But also, it's allowed us to not only enter that virtuous circle of charities, donors, and fundraisers with a giving platform, but extend that virtuous circle to include the retailers and shoppers, because every time they make a payment for a service that they're buying or a product they're buying, they're unwittingly supporting everything we're doing for the charities at no cost to them whatsoever, but that helps all of the charity platform flourish too. So it's an amazing technology. It's really kind of groundbreaking. I think it's going to revolutionize payments globally. And in the UK, I think we've around 60 jurisdictions now have followed the lead of open banking and follow the UK model. So it's quite nice to be able to say that we're kind of leading the world with a lot of what's happening in open banking in the UK.
That's amazing. So as an entrepreneur, I'm curious, what's your business model? I mean, you've got to pay the rent somewhere. Where's your revenue coming from? How do you generate your business model?
No, very good question. So the charities is completely free, always will be. But that's a non-negotiable for us. For as long as we exist, then we won't charge a charity at all for using the service. The commercial service is a paid service. It's incredibly aggressive, the price for that. But no, we're really targeting the small business sector because that's where for the last 30 years I've predominantly been involved, whether it was the telecoms with small businesses. Prior to that, we've done domain name registration, company formations, email marketing, but typically looking at that SME market. So we just recognize that this technology would serve the SME sector really well. So we've integrated that payment solution already with WooCommerce, for example. So you can just plug this into your e-commerce store at WooCommerce, and instead of taking payment by card, you take payment using open banking. We've done the same with an accountancy platform too. And we'll just basically chip away at all of those places where SMEs can be seen and would value our service. So we have a smartphone app as well for those in-store transactions. They're a small business too.
Fantastic. And I suspect the big card holders aren't real pleased with your innovation. Any good stories there?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's perfect for the title of the podcast, honestly, Greg, because think about endurance, and you're right. At the top of the tree there, you've got a couple of very, very, very large organizations that are incredibly profitable with a lot of power. So right down the chain, I talk about open banking. Essentially, we sit in the middle of a transaction as one entity. So the money moves with the consent of the person making the payment, explicit consent. The money moves from their account. We facilitate that into the commercial organization's account. There are no more intermediaries. You take a card payment, somewhere along the lines, there's probably 10, 12, 14 different people taking a share of that transaction fee. So yes, that becomes a real endurance piece for us in terms of convincing merchants, that this is, new, it's safe, it's secure, it's fast, it's instant settlement, all those things. Because as I mentioned, 60 years, they've been used to taking payments, certainly in an e-commerce environment, via cards. So there's going to be a degree of endurance around that. But also, I think chipping away at the models that exist, because so many of those models are born out of receiving a payment from the card transaction. If you think about a lot of the e-commerce stores, they may charge a subscription on a monthly basis for you to have a site on their store. But by and large, a lot of their revenue will be driven through every transaction you're making. They're getting a share ultimately from Visa, MasterCard, Amex.
So changing gears on you slightly, I'd love to talk to you about your running career, how you got into endurance. Give the audience a little bit of the background of when did that spark happen for you?
First of all, probably I was around 17. I was still at school. I was never particularly good at sports, like any of the team sports. If it was the soccer match, then I was the person who always got picked last and stood there waiting for someone to choose for me to be on their side. I'm left-footed and left-handed, so I kind of blame that, but it's nonsense, really. I just wasn't very adept. So it's always been, I think I've always had the attraction of things that I can do on my own, because I kind of quite enjoy the tranquility and peace and so on. So I think I just put on a pair of trainers and from the house, went out the back gate and did a short cross country. Came back, I'd exhausted the dog. My mother had a little dachshund at the time that wasn't really up for running any distances. And I actually panicked because she'd gone on holiday, left me in charge of the dog. And we got back and it just flaked out on the lawn. And I thought, my God, I've killed the dog. Like panting for a while and then very still. So anyway, kind of quite a dramatic start to my running career, but yeah, couple of miles cross country. And then I just got into that routine of wanting to go out really to clear my head more than anything else. And gradually, I think like anything, if I want to do something, I kind of just want to go a little bit further with it. I'm not a sprinter in anything at all. I enjoy swimming. I enjoy cycling. I'm not a triathlete, but I enjoy those things as well. But I'm not particularly fast at any of them. So for me, the pushing myself further was always about just going a little bit further distance-wise. So gradually kind of went up to do 10Ks and then half marathons. There's a run in the UK called the Great North Run, which happens up in the northeast, and about now, actually. I think it was last Sunday. I didn't do it this year, but I've done it many, many times. So that was my first half marathon. And I remember finishing that and thinking, how does anyone ever think about doing 26 miles? I thought the idea of starting again and just going round. But again, gradually just increase those miles, increase the training. And I've done the New York Marathon now 3 times. That's the only marathon I've done. I absolutely love it. And I want to go back again for my 60th, which will be in 18 months' time.
Fantastic. So thinking about your business, what mile marker are you on the marathon right now?
On this one, I would say I'm about 300 yards out of the start line. So there's a long, long way to go. But it's slightly different from a lot of the other businesses that I've been involved in. Some of those we've recognized that we want to grow to a certain point and then probably exit fairly swiftly. And that happens for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's just a recognition that the market is no longer there. I think with telecoms, I've been involved since 2005, I want to say. And by the time we sold the last telecoms business, we were at 2020. And I think for a few years prior to that, there's that recognition that you look along a train platform and there's not many people holding their phones to their ears. What they're doing is tapping on the screens and interacting like that. So for me, voice telephony, which is where we were at, felt like it was going to be in terminal decline as fewer and fewer people use their phones for voice. So I think prior to that, for a few years, we've been thinking, we want to exit this. And the timing, again, was serendipitous with the payments thing, but it felt right for me that was when we wanted to do it. I think it's recognizing what the opportunity is, how long you're going to be in it before you want to exit. But the payments one is just such a vast, vast market. If you think about the number of transactions that are happening every day, even with this new technology, the kind of market share we'll be looking for in terms of it being a huge business would still be in the 0.0 something percent of the overall market. So I can see us being involved in this for a good while.
So talk to us about the next 26 miles. What is next phase for this business for you? Like, how can an audience help you, support you in the development of what you're working on?
I think one of the things that's really interesting about marketing this is we feel like we really need to get to the merchants. We need to get to the people who are actually taking the payments, because it can be quite tricky going to some of the platforms that sit in the middle because of that almost vested interest that I mentioned before, that they don't necessarily want to start looking at this revolutionary technology because they stand to lose some revenue there. So I think that's going to be quite a long piece, both in terms of education and reach. So we're looking at trying to shortcut some of that by getting onto the platforms where we can get onto those platforms, and in the areas where we can't, through lobby, through information, through podcasts, through whatever it might be, that I guess build a groundswell of pressure ultimately on those platforms that aren't allowing open banking to say, well, look, if you're not going to allow open banking providers onto your platform for payments, then we'll actually just move our e-commerce business somewhere else, because I think ultimately that will happen. But I think what we're looking to do is really try and develop that small business market. It's quite nice in the way that we can go into particular verticals. An example would be, we've got a couple of car dealers who use the service at the moment. So they'll take payments for used cars. Instead of taking those on a debit card, which they might do, it's a transaction of a few £1,000s. They move it onto open banking, and they're paying a penny for that transaction, which is instant and it's in their bank account straight away. It's super secure and it's very easy for them to set that up. So it seems quite logical for us then to go out to all of the used car dealers in the UK and go, okay, here's an example of how this is working in practice. And similarly, I think we'll just go into various verticals in that way. But the reality is, in terms of the product, it doesn't matter whether you're taking a payment in person, whether you take a payment on an invoice run. A firm of solicitors might be a case in point. They don't have an e-commerce store or anything like that, but they run invoices once a month. Or you're in a retail environment. All of those lend themselves to using open banking. So opportunities abound. I think what we've got to do is recognize the most efficient way of kind of knocking all of those down, in a sequential way.
And so at what point do you jump across the pond and come over here to the US and expand that technology?
It's very interesting, because we're getting quite a lot of interest, as you would well imagine, from the US. I think some of the difficulties lie around the mandate that you don't yet have over there, certainly not at the level that we did, because the way that it operated in the UK was, I think, the CMA 9, so the Competition and Markets Authority, top 9 banks were mandated to do this and put this in place. And that was really a huge catalyst for, not only adoption, but for innovation as well. So people like HMRC, the equivalent of IRS here in the UK, now you can pay any tax bill, including tax fines, using open banking. So that's really put it in front of a lot of people as a new technology. I think once we've got that in place in the US and the doors really open over there, the opportunity is just vast. But I would say in reality, probably still a couple of years away from that in big numbers. I mean, you've seen some success in similar technologies like FedNow, I'm sure, and people are familiar with that. But open banking is just a little more versatile in the way that it can operate.
Kieron, you mentioned earlier you're going through a fundraising process, fintech sector. For those entrepreneurs on our podcast today, can you give us a sense of what the fundraising market's like at the moment?
It's been really, in our sector, it's been really tough. I was looking at a column chart the other day, and it really impacted just how significant it was, the drop off from quite a nice steady growth up until a couple of years ago. And then it just literally fell off a cliff. I think some of the challenges that we'd faced is that some of our peers have received significant amounts of funding and then in some cases not delivered as much as was anticipated. I think there's been some conflation of fintech with other areas. So again, I think it's been damaged a little bit by reputation in things like crypto and so on, which again is now recovering really well. So I think we're absolutely turning a corner, but I don't think there was very much other than sitting tight and just waiting for the market to change and hoping that will be sooner. It really does feel now like we've turned a corner and we're seeing a lot more interest in what we're doing. But we actually, having said seen a lot more interest, we actually kind of just parked everything and said, there's no point going out there just now. Let's just wait, continue to found a fund and continue to build out product. And then once we're in a position where we feel like the market's ready, we'll go out and start looking again.
And will that accelerate your progress significantly?
Massively, because I think what the challenge that we've got at the moment, they're twofold. One is that we have a linear approach to build because of the size of the team. So I'd love to be rolling out and integrating with 5 things at once rather than one thing at a time, because the opportunity is there and it would allow us to do that. And the second is just marketing. It is literally, this is fairly nascent technology. A lot of people aren't familiar with it. So we just need to educate the market to a degree as to how it works. The case is, it almost proves itself if you can get a transaction into your bank account for a penny and it's instant and it's more secure than a debit card transaction. There's less friction at checkout, with the exception perhaps currently of things like contactless. So if I was buying a cup of coffee in a cafe, then hands down, I would use contactless payment for that because I'm just tapping my phone and I'm done. But again, we've seen moves around there with Apple opening up the NFC chip to pay third-party payment providers. I think once we get open banking into Apple Wallet and similar, equivalents in Android phones, then I think, at that point it is really game over, because I will buy my cup of coffee because contactless will work in exactly the same way using an open banking transaction. But for now, I think the real advantages are around e-commerce, where I'm not entering a 16-digit card number, a CVV, first name, last name, zip code. None of that's being entered. There is literally no data entry. It's authorization using biometric data in my mobile telephone or in my online banking. So definitely much, much easier for us to target that market initially. And anywhere where it's in a retail environment, I would say anywhere where there's a longer dwell time at checkout, and it's a higher value transaction. So again, in our market, we'd look at would be someone like an antiques dealer. You're going to buy a sofa and it's $900. You're probably going to be arranging delivery with the antique dealer. You don't mind spending another 20 seconds going through approving a transaction using open banking on your phone rather than tapping a contactless payment terminal.
Certainly. That's really helpful. Thank you. You mentioned your team. Can you talk a little bit about building a team? What's the next phase of that? Any characteristics amongst the people that you have on the team? Are they all endurance folks? Any chance of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, my daughter's my co-founder, my eldest daughter. She got involved when she was doing her master's, and she actually started out doing some copywriting from, it was a gap year. So she was taking a gap year, touring around South America and needed some extra cash. So she was writing SEO copy for the website. And never left. We never let her go. So she's ended up kind of growing through the online fundraising platform. So, fairly young, dynamic, very driven, and now our head of operations. She went through a bit of a scare just at the time of COVID as well. So she had a health scare. started out with Lyme disease, ended up with cancer. She was treated. She's all clear now. But as a result of that, interestingly, she made massive changes to her lifestyle. I've been vegan for many, many years, but she makes my diet look like a walk in the park. She's super, super strict on what she eats and quality of food and organic and sugar-free, the whole lot. And she also started running as well, which was great to see because she had a kind of little interest in that. She was a hockey player at school, so she was more of the team player that I wasn't. But no, she seems to be really enjoying that now, getting out. As for the rest of the team, we've got guys left recently, but was a very, very keen gym goer. So he used to work out all the time in the gym. But it's the typical spread, I guess, of techie type people. Our head of technology came from a company called Crowdcube. So really good fintech or tech background in a similar kind of space. And then we've got people in regulatory compliance and people in customer support, marketing, and so on. So the usual spread. But we're a small team, so around a dozen of us in total.
You mentioned vegan, organic, sugar-free. We've talked about yoga. Any other life hacks that you've got in your bag of tricks that you could share?
The yoga and the running are the staples for me, and I can't see me ever changing from those. I just find that balance really, really great of those two things. I enjoy speaking to you today from Spain. So my wife's Spanish, and we split our time between Spain and the UK. So when I'm here swimming in the sea, I absolutely love. I bought last year a paddleboard, and I enjoy that as well. I wouldn't say I'm particularly fantastic at it, but it's great, and again quite challenging, particularly when the waves are up a little bit. And most recently, and this surprised me enormously, I've really started enjoying skipping with a rope, jump rope. I think you call it in the US, but we call it skipping in the UK. So I've taken to doing that. I noticed on my Garmin watch and on Strava as well, I always get the same thing. I think it's you need to do a bit more high interval type training to get that cardio up a little bit, because I tend to run at a similar pace, even with the hills, and I don't tend to do the kind of fast intervals and strong hill repeats. So I thought, well, skipping will be good for that. I hear great things about it. I'm really enjoying it, actually. I think it's great.
Are you by chance using a weighted rope?
I'm using something called a Sonic Boom, is their brand name, and it's supposed to be quite a fast rope because I thought I'd try and increase my speed. So the rope itself feels very, very light, but the handles have a little bit of weight in them as well. But no, I'm no expert. So if you talk to me about gear, you'll lose me in a couple of minutes. It was one of those quick Google search and then a look on Amazon and see what's around.
A friend of mine runs a weighted jump rope business. I'll send you his link when I get a chance.
Always up for a challenge, Greg. That'll be my next thing.
You and I can compete. Yeah. We'll do it over Strava or something.
Absolutely.
Kieron, one of the endurance leadership principles that I believe in is maintaining focus. What comes to you when I say that? What resonates when I say maintaining focus?
I think, again, I'm going to use that word balance and send that straight back to you. So for me, a lot of the focus comes from being able to just take a bit of time out. And I think that's got easier as I've got older. I think I've learned, because it's so easy to put in those 18-hour days, 7 days a week when you're a bit younger. When you get a little older, actually, it's harder to do that. But at the same time, I found that to be really a lot healthier. So people say to me, have you ever had, one of the questions I've been asked about yoga, have you ever had those moments on your yoga mat when you suddenly solve a problem that you've been puzzling over for ages? It seems like a great place to do it. And my answer to that is actually no, because if I'm doing the yoga really well, in my own mind really well, then actually what I'm focusing on is nothing other than the breath and the movement. So, if a good experience on the mat for me would be, no, I've managed to clear my head. I'm not thinking about things. Now, the reverse is true when I'm running, because often I will set out, and because you're not necessarily thinking about or having to concentrate on running, that's pretty natural. I've definitely been in a position where out running, I've solved business problems and things have just occurred to me at mile 7 of a long run. And you just think, why didn't I think of that before? So I think the focus comes from having that balance, having that ability to step away, take a break, give your brain a rest, give your body a rest. One of my sessions every week is restorative yoga. And there'll be many times I think I'm just going to fall asleep any minute now because I'm actually that tired. It's been a heavy week. And I find that fabulous. I come out of a restorative session just thinking, I feel fully refreshed and the batteries are recharged.
And are you doing that specific times of the day? Is it time blocked on your calendar?
It's not time blocked that methodically. No, it is. I was going to say that, but it really is because my running is Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. It's always in the morning and my yoga's in the evening. And yeah, so it probably is. But I don't have an alarm that goes off at 6 o'clock and says, you need to run now. If it's 7 one morning or, 8 another, that's fine. But I tend to be quite rigid on the days that I run. I'm trying actually now to practice yoga 7 days a week and do one restorative and then the other 6 Ashtanga. But that again, there'll be days when it's just you just feel beaten up and you've had too many meetings, and so I think that's the other thing I remember a yoga teacher saying to me, and that resonated as well. You need to be the master of your training plan, not a slave to it. And it's so true as well. We can get to the point where I've made myself ill by just overtraining, and you think, no, I don't really need to run those. I don't know about you, Greg. I'm really guilty of doing that when I've got a race in the diary because I'll plan out for 12 weeks what sessions I'm going to do literally for that. I say plan out. It's usually I've downloaded a program, stuck it in Excel or put it into something else and I'll follow it as religiously as I can. And there've been times when I've either bitten off more than I can chew. I'm trying to go too fast for my age or whatever it might be. And you just think, no, it's crazy. You're going to end up taking a week off because you can't recover.
Yeah, there's a lesson there for sure. My final question: you're at mile 7. You come up with this brilliant business idea. How do you capture the idea without losing it over the next 10 miles?
I don't know. This is not in any way supposed to sound arrogant, but my memory is quite good at retaining things like that. I'm not one for writing things down very much. I do tend to keep it all in my head. So I will get back. I've had times when during the night, if I've woken up with things, I used to just use the voice memo tool on my phone and write things down. I enjoy making music as well. And that was actually one time when I could never do that. I'd be kind of wake up and think of a particular melody or a riff and think, oh, that's really great. And if I didn't record that, actually just hum it into a phone or something, I can guarantee by the morning I've forgotten it. But actually when it comes to, a particular plan, a business idea, a marketing strap lines, occasionally you'll come up with something like that you think is really great and you can forget those. So, I mean, I always have my phone with me. If I think I'm in danger of doing something, then I will probably just get the phone out and whiz a voice memo down. I don't use headphones, so I'm not one of those people who can run along and say, hey, Siri, make a note of this, but maybe I should. But I've never liked running with headphones. I always find it very claustrophobic.
Yeah, I find that I don't race with headphones, so I train with headphones. So you just kind of get used to it. Kieron, an audience member wants to get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Probably LinkedIn. So linkedin.com/ I think it's IN, isn't it? And then /Kieron James, just as my name spelled. I've got a website at kieron.net. It's updated sometimes. I was trying to make an effort of putting most of my runs in, which I did quite well for a couple of months, and then I've fallen off. So I'm kind of more keen to do the running than necessarily blog about it. If I blog about it, it tends to be a few words just saying how sunny it was, what a great view it was, and a picture. So it's not wildly interesting, but kieron.net for the blog.
Fantastic. And we'll include those links in our show notes. Kieron, it's been great having you on the show. I love the innovation, the technology that you're pushing out to the market. We're going to keep watching you, and hopefully someday soon you'll jump over the pond and have that impact, especially on our charities, right? I do a lot of work with a lot of different charities, and it's financial work. And so it's amazing to see and almost sad to see how much of those transactions, those donations end up in a non-charitable pocket. So keep innovating, keep us honest. It was great having you on the show. I really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure entirely. Thanks ever so much, Greg. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefenduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits.